Alright, so here's the context before I get into the actual mess. I'm not the kind of guy who usually posts online about family drama. Honestly, I used to think people who did that were exaggerating for the internet. But I'm at a point where saying this out loud, even to strangers, feels like the only way to actually process it. If nothing else, at least I can put the story somewhere outside my own head. So, this starts the night I realized my family didn't actually see me as a person. More like a punchline. 6 months ago, my uncle, my mom's older brother, threw one of those big family dinners he loved way too much. The kind where he'd spend the whole night swaggering around the kitchen like he was Gordon Ramsay, talking loudly about grind set and people lacking drive, while everyone nodded like he was some kind of prophet instead of a guy who owned a mid-sized logistics company in central Pennsylvania. For context, I'm 29. I had a stable job in tech for 6 years until the company went through a massive restructuring. 90 people got cut, including me. The layoff wasn't personal, wasn't performance-related, wasn't anything except corporate greed and the wrong quartile on the spreadsheet. But if your family already thinks you're soft, unemployed equals deadbeat. End of story. The only reason I went to the dinner at all was because my mom begged. She hit me with the whole, "It'll be good for you to get out" speech. She even said my uncle had been asking about me, which in hindsight was already a red flag. My uncle never asked about anyone unless he smelled weakness he could weaponize later. I showed up at his place around 6. The whole house was buzzing. People laughing, talking over each other, clinking glasses. And me, standing there smiling politely, pretending I wasn't on week 3 of scrolling job boards at 2 in the morning wondering if I'd totally mismanaged my life. Dinner started normal enough, but I should have known something was off when everyone suddenly got quiet after the first round of drinks. My uncle looked over at me with this smirk, this smug, oily smirk that already told me he'd been waiting for a moment like this. Like he had the perfect line chambered. "So," he said, so loudly everyone had to look at him. "How's the job search going? Or are you still taking your little mental health vacation?" The table laughed. Not even soft, nervous laughter. Actual laughter. I felt my ears burn instantly. My cousin muttered "damn" under his breath. My aunt actually shook her head like she pitied me. I tried to keep my voice even when I said, "I've had a few interviews. It's going fine." But my uncle wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, folded his arms like he was settling in for a performance, and said, "You know, this is exactly what your father was like. Couldn't hold down a job, always making excuses, always hoping life would just improve magically." Then he actually laughed. That loud, deep, fake from the diaphragm laugh he did when he wanted people to join in. And they did. Every single person at the table except my mom. Even my cousins laughed. Even the ones I used to babysit. I think that's what stung most. My father walked out when I was 7. I barely remember his voice, but apparently, the story has lived on like some kind of shitty family legend. My father, the useless one. The guy who made my mom cry for months. The guy my uncle would bring up as if he was some moral warning label slapped on my forehead. I didn't say anything. Not because I agreed. Not because it didn't hurt. I just froze. The same way I did when I was a kid and someone dropped a comment I didn't know how to respond to. That stupid survival instinct of keeping everything contained so nothing spills and makes things worse. My uncle grinned like he'd won. My mom whispered, "That's enough," but he brushed her off. Everyone went back to eating like nothing happened, and I sat there pushing food around my plate, counting the minutes until I could leave without looking dramatic. As soon as dessert hit the table, I excused myself. My uncle didn't even look up when he said, "Good luck out there. It's tough when you don't have the stomach for real work." More laughter. I walked out of that house with my jaw so tight it hurt. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. But in the car, on the drive home, something in me shifted. If you've ever had a moment where someone finally crosses a line so deeply that you realize you're done trying to fit into the space they built for you, that was it. I decided I would never, ever let that man see me broken again. I spent the next months grinding harder than I ever had in my life. Networking, studying, picking up freelance contracts just to keep myself afloat. I'd wake up at 6, send out 20 applications, work 8 hours for clients in wildly different time zones, then spend the evenings preparing for certification exams. I know that sounds dramatic, like some montage sequence, but it was ugly. It was exhausting. There were days I hated the world. Days I hated myself. Days I replayed that dinner so many times I could hear every laugh as clearly as if I were still sitting there. But eventually, somehow, I landed a position at a restructuring firm. A job I wasn't even fully sure I was qualified for, but they hired me because I'd done so much independent work they were impressed. And that job came with power, access, a voice in meetings I never thought I'd be sitting in. And that is how, 6 months after that dinner, I saw my uncle's company name on a list. A list of businesses in deep financial trouble. A list we were assigned to evaluate. A list I had to sign off on. And that's when things really started. When I first saw his company's name on the docket, I honestly thought I was hallucinating. I blinked twice, leaned forward, even scrolled back up like maybe my eyes had just thrown a glitch. But no, there it was, in plain black text on a white document. Wexford Logistics Group. My uncle's pride and joy. The company he talked about like it was Apple, NASA, and the cure for cancer all in one. The company he weaponized during every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every summer cookout, as proof that he had it figured out and the rest of us were just trying to catch up. I just stared at the screen for a good 2 minutes. Not smiling, not angry, just still. You ever have a moment where your brain just steps out of your body for a second? That's what it felt like. Like I was watching myself see his company on that list. There were notes already attached. Cash flow instability, supplier losses, repeated loan restructuring, worker turnover described as concerningly high. There was even a line in the internal commentary that said, leadership practices appear inconsistent and lack strategic cohesion. I actually laughed a little at that one. Not a joyful laugh. More like the kind of exhausted, disbelieving laugh that breaks out when the universe suddenly shows you a side quest you didn't know you'd been preparing for. I didn't tell anyone at work that the owner was my uncle. I didn't even breathe weirdly when my manager said, "We'll need someone from restructuring to assess the situation and prepare correspondence." He said it casually, sipping coffee, flipping through folders. Then he handed me the file like it was any normal task. "You're on this one," he said. I remember the weight of that manila folder. It felt heavier than it should have. My fingers kind of pressed into it, like maybe some part of me was afraid it would disappear if I didn't physically hold on to it. I nodded, kept my expression neutral, and said, "Yeah, I can take it." He went on talking about deadlines and formats, but my mind was already miles away. Back at that dinner table, at the laughter, at the way everyone looked at me like I was this defective product that had rolled off the assembly line wrong. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I didn't feel that cold rush people talk about. What I did feel was this bizarre sense of closure. Like something had come full circle without me forcing it. I spent the rest of the day reviewing the file. And the deeper I went, the more it became clear. This wasn't a small hiccup. It wasn't even a tough quarter situation. This was a slow-motion collapse years in the making. Poor decisions, risky expansions, financial negligence disguised as confidence. The numbers didn't lie. Even if he'd spent years convincing everyone around him he was some business genius. And the thing is, he could have survived. If he had asked for help early. If he had swallowed his pride. If he had treated his employees better so they didn't keep quitting and taking contracts with them. If he had listened to advice instead of lecturing everyone on hustle culture like he was single-handedly building the American economy. But he didn't. Pride rotted that company from the inside. Around 7 that night, after most of the office had cleared out, I finally leaned back in my chair and exhaled. The only light was the blue glow from my monitor, washing over the stacks of financial reports. I could hear the building HVAC clicking in the ceiling. It was the kind of quiet that makes every thought feel louder. And that's when it hit me. I was going to be the one who wrote the notice. Not because I wanted to. Not because anyone told me I had to. But because that's how the process worked. The assessor drafts the official communication. The assessor signs the notice. Me. I was the assessor. My name. My signature. On the letter that would tell him his company was entering restructuring review. That bankruptcy was almost inevitable. The same man who humiliated me in front of my entire family. The same man who compared me to the father who abandoned me. The same man who laughed like ruining me was a sport. It didn't feel real. The moment I realized I'd be the one to deliver that blow, I just stared at my name typed at the bottom of the template. There was this weird sensation in my chest, like a knot loosening, almost like a bruise healing from the inside out. I didn't run to tell anyone. I didn't text my mom, my friends, nobody. I just quietly saved the working draft, shut off my monitor, and walked out into the cold night air. Driving home felt different. Not triumphant, not petty, just calm, like I had been underwater for years and suddenly surfaced, like someone had placed the final puzzle piece without me even asking for it. The next day, I dove deeper into the numbers. Every page made the picture clearer. My uncle had been bluffing for years. His successful business was an image propped up with bad loans, inflated forecasts, and the sheer force of ego. I kept thinking back to that dinner. How confidently he mocked me. How sure he was that he was untouchable. How he used my father's failures like a weapon. And now, months later, there I was, sitting in a sterile office, typing language that would legally confirm what he'd been hiding from everyone. By the time I finished the assessment, it was nearly 9 at night. My eyes burned. My back ached. But the notice was ready. It was professional, neutral, exact. No personal undertones. No bitterness. Just facts. I hovered the cursor over the signature line. I typed my full name. And in that moment, I swear the room felt different. Lighter. Like something old and toxic had finally dissolved. The notice was ready to be mailed out. And I had no idea just how he would react when he saw it. The notice went out on a Thursday morning. I remember because it was raining hard enough that the office windows looked like someone had painted them with streaks of gray. I dropped the sealed envelope into the outgoing mail tray without any dramatic pause or breathy moment. I just placed it there between a stack of vendor documents and someone's lunch delivery receipt that accidentally got mixed in. It was such an ordinary motion for something that would completely detonate a part of my family. The rest of the day went like any other. Meetings, spreadsheets, a coworker complaining about his fantasy football team, coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. Nothing hinted that something seismic had been set in motion. I didn't hear anything for 3 days. By the 4th day, I couldn't tell if I was relieved or anxious. Some part of me thought maybe the notice got delayed, or maybe he read it and immediately drowned it in bourbon. Or maybe he never put 2 and 2 together, that the M, Carter, on the signature line was his nephew. But on day 5, at around 9:30 p.m., my phone started blowing up. I'd just gotten home, kicked off my shoes, reheated leftover pasta, and sat down to watch something brainless. I wasn't expecting anything serious. Then I saw the notifications. 3 missed calls from my mom. 1 missed call from my aunt, from an unknown number that, after a quick search, matched his company's general line. My stomach dropped. I didn't pick up immediately. I just sat there with the phone in my hand, the screen still glowing with the missed call icons. I could practically feel the heat of adrenaline in my chest. Then another call came in from my mom. I answered. She didn't even say hello. "What did you do?" Her voice wasn't angry. It was scared, breathless, like she'd just gotten off a roller coaster she wasn't prepared to be on. "What do you mean?" I said, even though I already knew. "It's your uncle. He came over screaming. He's saying you sent something to his office. Something about the company being evaluated for bankruptcy." She paused, lowered her voice. "Is that true?" I leaned back on the couch, stared at the ceiling, and said, "Mom, that's my job. It came through the firm. I was assigned to it." She didn't speak right away. I swear I could hear her processing, her trying to match the soft-spoken, non-confrontational son she raised with the idea that I'd just dropped a legal hammer on her brother. "You signed it," she finally whispered. "Yeah," I said. "I did." A long silence followed. Not cold, just heavy. Then she said something that surprised me. "I'm not mad at you. I want you to know that." I exhaled without realizing I was holding my breath. "But he is furious," she added. "He's saying you targeted him, that you did it out of revenge." The irony almost made me laugh. Revenge? I hadn't even known his company was on the docket until I saw it. The universe handed me the file. It wasn't me hunting him down. "Mom, I didn't choose his case. And I didn't do anything wrong," I said. "He ran that company into the ground by himself." She sighed, the kind of tired sigh you only hear from someone caught in the middle of a storm they didn't ask for. "Just be prepared. He's not going to let this go." We hung up shortly after. I sat there staring at the TV screen, which had gone to the streaming service screensaver. My food was cold. My apartment felt smaller than usual, like the air had thickened. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, he called me directly. I didn't pick up. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, and again, for almost 10 minutes straight. It got to the point where I had to silence my phone because the buzzing was actually making my pulse spike. Later, I listened to the first voicemail. His voice cracked with this furious strain I'd never heard before. "You arrogant little brat," he snapped. "You think you're better than me? You think you can humiliate me? After everything I've done for this family?" I paused the message there, not because it upset me, but because the hypocrisy was almost too heavy to hold. This man mocked me in front of everyone. He reduced me to a joke. He compared me to the father who abandoned me. But now suddenly he felt humiliated because he was held accountable for his own financial mess. I hit play again. "You better come talk to me," he growled. "Face to face. Like a man. Because the hell I'm about to rain down on you if you don't." I deleted the voicemail before he finished. I wasn't scared of him. Not anymore. But I wasn't giving him the satisfaction of hearing his threats echo through my apartment. At work, I kept everything professional. My manager even asked casually, "Any issues with the Wexford case so far?" I said, "Nothing outside the numbers." The truth was, the numbers were the least dramatic part of this. By Friday afternoon, my cousins started messaging me too. One sent, "Dude, what did you do to my dad?" Another said, "Why is he screaming at everyone about bankruptcy?" I didn't respond. Not to any of them. The only message I actually read twice came from my younger cousin, Allison. She's 20. Been quiet her whole life. The kind of kid who watches family drama from the edges of the room, not the center. She wrote, "I'm sorry about what happened at dinner. I should have said something. I didn't. I'm sorry." I stared at that message for a long time. Not because it changed anything, but because it was the first moment in all of this where someone acknowledged what he had done to me months earlier. By the time the weekend rolled around, silence settled into everything like dust. But I knew it wasn't over. My uncle wasn't the type to collapse quietly, and I had a feeling he was about to drag the entire family into something none of them were ready for. Only thing was, he had no idea I wasn't the same person who sat at that dinner table. I didn't see my uncle in person until the following Wednesday, a full week after the notice went out. A full week of phone calls I ignored, voicemails I deleted, and group chats that went from confused to chaotic. I knew he would show up eventually. The man lived off confrontation the way other people lived off oxygen. It happened at my mom's house. I'd stopped by after work because she said she made dinner and wanted company. She sounded tired, like she hadn't slept properly in days. I figured she needed support more than I needed a quiet night at home. So I went. The second I pulled into her driveway, I saw his truck parked crookedly at the curb. I almost backed out. I almost said screw it, we'll reschedule, and went home. But then I thought about the months I had spent rebuilding myself. The effort, the long nights, the discipline, the mindset shift. And I refused to let him drag me back to the version of myself who froze at the dinner table. So I went in. My mom was in the kitchen, moving anxiously between the counter and the stove. When she heard the door, she turned quickly and said, "He's here. He got here 20 minutes ago. He wouldn't leave." I nodded once. "Okay." She grabbed my arm. "You don't have to talk to him. I'll make him leave." "No," I said. "I've got it." Her eyes softened, like she wasn't sure whether to be proud or worried. He was in the living room, pacing like a storm compressed into a human body. The second he saw me, he stopped mid-step. "You." He pointed at me like I was on trial. "You think you're real brave sending that notice." I set my bag down calmly. "I did my job. You targeted me." His voice came out sharp, already rising. "Don't play stupid. I didn't even know your company was on the list until it landed on my desk." "That's a lie." "It's not." He took a slow step toward me. Not threatening, just trying to dome the space, the way he always did with people he wanted to intimidate. "You think you're better than me now?" he said quietly. Too quietly. Those dangerous conversation tones people use right before they explode. "You think getting some fancy job gives you the right to tear down what I built?" "No," I said. "Your numbers tore it down." He flinched. Legitimately flinched. It was small, like a muscle twitch he didn't mean to show. "You think you understand business? I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. Then you should know mismanaging a company catches up eventually." His face went red instantly, top of the cheeks, bridge of the nose, like a pressure gauge hitting the danger zone. "You ungrateful little." "Stop." My mom stepped between us. She wasn't yelling, but her voice had steel in it. "This is my house. If you want to talk, talk. If you want to scream, leave." He ignored her, kept his eyes locked on me. "You embarrassed me," he hissed. I didn't look away. "You embarrassed yourself." His jaw clenched. For a second, I thought he might actually swing, which was insane because he'd never laid a hand on anyone as far as I knew. But he looked like a man whose identity was crumbling in real time, and he didn't know what to do with the debris. Then he said something that actually stunned me. "You're just like your father." He said it quietly, too quietly, not loud like at the dinner, not performative. This was venom, pure, directed venom. My mom inhaled sharply. Something in me snapped, but not in the way he wanted. I didn't yell. I didn't lash back. I didn't defend myself or my father. Instead, I said, "I'm nothing like him, and I'm nothing like you." That silence afterward was thick enough to choke on. He scoffed, shook his head like he couldn't believe I dared to say that, and stormed past me toward the door. But then he stopped, turned, and jabbed a finger in my direction. "This isn't over." I didn't respond. He slammed the door so hard the picture frames rattled. For a long moment, the only sound was my mom exhaling shakily. She turned to me. "I'm so sorry. You don't have to apologize for him." She shook her head. "He's been unraveling for months. The company was his personality. Without it." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. Later that night, as I drove home, his last words kept replaying in my head. "This isn't over." I didn't take it as a threat, more like a warning, to himself, not me. He wasn't used to consequences. He wasn't used to losing. He wasn't used to anyone standing up to him without folding. But consequences don't care about ego. And losing doesn't negotiate. Friday morning, my manager walked over to my desk with a folder in hand. "We're moving to the next stage on Wexford Logistics," he said. "There'll be a meeting soon with the owner. Final review before proceedings advance." My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something else. Something like clarity, because I realized in that moment, I wasn't done with him. Not yet. Not until he sat across from me in a professional conference room and had to face the fact that the nephew he mocked, minimized, and humiliated was now the one analyzing the ashes he left behind. And he would have to face me without theatrics, without an audience, without the comfort of being the loudest man in the room. Just him, and me, and the wreckage he built with his own hands. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday, and that was the day everything truly broke open. Tuesday felt strange from the moment I woke up. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just heavy. The kind of morning where the air feels thicker and your body moves on autopilot because your brain is too busy rehearsing scenarios. I got ready in silence. Shower, shave, shirt, tie, coffee. Everything felt mechanical. The meeting was set for 11 a.m. I got to the office early, mostly to ground myself. I walked into the conference room 15 minutes before anyone else. The table was spotless, the TV screen waiting for the slides, the chairs all lined up. For a moment, it didn't feel like a room. It felt like a stage. I sat down, opened my folder, and forced myself to breathe normally. I had imagined this moment so many times, not out of spite, but out of curiosity. What would he look like without the armor of performance? What would a man who built his entire identity around success look like when confronted with the reality he couldn't outrun? At exactly 10:59, the door swung open. He walked in wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but it didn't distract from the exhaustion on his face. He looked older than the last time I saw him. Not just older, thinned out, frayed, like someone had taken sandpaper to his confidence. He froze when he saw me sitting there. His eyes flicked to the nameplate in front of me, back to my face, then back to the nameplate, like he couldn't believe the universe had actually arranged things this way. "You're kidding me," he said under his breath. I stayed seated. "Please take a seat." He didn't. He just stared at me like I was a stranger wearing his nephew's skin. "You're part of this meeting?" he asked, voice dripping with disbelief. "I'm the restructuring analyst assigned to your case." Something in his expression twitched. A crack in the facade. Two of my colleagues walked in behind him, oblivious to the tension. They greeted him professionally, shook hands, sat down. My uncle sat too, but the chair creaked under the weight of whatever he was holding in. He wouldn't look at me. I started the meeting. "Today we'll review the current financial state of Wexford Logistics, outline potential pathways, and discuss what steps need to be taken to move forward." My voice was steady, neutral, not cold, not emotional, just factual. But inside, a version of me, the version sitting silent at that dinner months ago, felt something like closure beginning to take shape. We went over the numbers slide by slide. Every red flag, every unpaid invoice, every miscalculation, every reckless expansion. My colleagues chimed in professionally, asking questions that he struggled to answer. For the first half of the meeting, he stayed defensive. We had a bad quarter. Suppliers were unreliable. The market shifted unexpectedly. He had excuses for everything. But excuses don't erase numbers. And numbers don't care how loudly you justify them. Halfway through, one of my coworkers said something that finally cracked him open. "Mr. Wexford, this wasn't a single bad quarter. This was a pattern of decisions that began years ago." My uncle leaned back, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles went white. He didn't respond. He just stared at the table, jaw tightening, loosening, tightening again. It was the quietest I had ever seen him. Eventually, he lifted his eyes and looked straight at me. "You enjoy this?" he said quietly. The room went still. My colleagues looked confused. I stayed calm. "No, this is my job." "You're lying." "I'm not. After what happened at dinner, after the things I said, after the whole family laughed at you, you expect me to believe this is just coincidence." I held his gaze. "Whether you believe it or not doesn't change the truth." "And what truth is that?" "That you ran your company into the ground. And this was always going to happen." He stared at me for a long moment. A very long moment. Then he laughed. Only it wasn't his usual performance laugh. It was broken, bitter, small. "You know," he said, "I used to think you were weak. Always so quiet. Always so passive. I thought you'd end up just like your father." I didn't respond. Not because it hurt, but because I finally understood something. He said those things because he needed someone to look down on. Someone to measure himself against. Someone he could use as proof he was winning. He needed me to be lesser. Not because I was, but because he was terrified he might be. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "But here you are, sitting across from me, holding the fate of my company in your hands." "I don't hold the fate of anything," I said. "The numbers do." That quiet hung like a stone dropped into deep water. My colleagues resumed the professional discussion, outlining next steps, legal phases, timelines. But my uncle wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at the papers in front of him. The numbers, the projections, the grim clarity of it all. By the end of the meeting, he looked like someone who had aged a decade in an hour. As we wrapped up, he stood slowly. He didn't shake anyone's hand. He didn't argue. He didn't bluster. He didn't even look angry. He just looked defeated. When he reached the door, he paused, turned back to me. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something. An apology, maybe, or blame, or resentment, or gratitude. I'll never know. Because he shut his mouth again and left without a word. The door clicked shut behind him. My coworkers chatted about follow-up tasks, next phases, deadlines. I nodded along mechanically. When the room finally emptied, I sat there alone. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Not because I'd won something, because I'd finally stopped carrying the weight of a man who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. That night, I went home, sat on my couch, and let myself breathe in a way I hadn't in years. Life didn't get magically easier after that. My family is still complicated. My uncle still doesn't speak to me. My cousins are split, half understand, half don't. But me? I stopped living in the shadow of someone else's loudness. And for the first time in my life, silence felt like strength. If you made it all the way to the end, thanks for sticking with me. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the story, consider subscribing to the channel and giving the video a like. It helps me share more stories like this. Thanks.